Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu jami'an. I am Abu Bara Muhammad Amriki from Black American Muslim Opinion. Tonight, I'd like to talk a little bit about domestic violence in those Muslim communities where the Imam and those in leadership inside the community hide and don't deal with domestic violence in the Muslim community. I also want to talk about some of the things, the effects of domestic violence, how it affects individuals, and how it affects children in the household who witness and deal with and have to deal with the trauma of domestic violence. So first and foremost, related to domestic violence between two husband and wife, I want to let people know that domestic violence is not restricted to just men beating women. It is also women abusing or beating men. And domestic violence also is not restricted to physical violence, physical. All right. It also could be verbal and mental. It could be verbal and also mental. It's not restricted to beating with the hand or striking or hitting people with objects, so on and so forth. So I make sure it's not something that's restricted to men beating women. It's also women beating men, also women verbally abusing men, and men also verbally abusing female women, meaning their spouse. Here, so there was a video I seen yesterday, and I want to show the video. It's a video I seen on TikTok by a sister by the name of Suhaila. May Allah preserve her, where she was talking about domestic violence inside the community. I want to play this video real quick for the audience.
So I wanted to touch on something really quick that a lot of women go through and a lot of things that we are actually putting or sweeping under the rug, right? When it comes to women asking for kulas and women going through domestic violence relationships. Like, there are a lot of sisters that are going through some situations with their spouse where violence is involved, and it seems as if when the sisters go to the masjid to talk about this thing, the only advice that they will give the sister is have sabr. Have sabr. So you have a man who's beating on her, and there's no accountability for the brothers. So then what is she supposed to do? Stay in that toxic relationship? So my question is, where's the accountability when it comes to that brother who's beating on his wife? And I hear so much, well, these questions should have been asked at the sit down, that question should have been asked at the sit down, but at the end of the day, what does that have to do with this man beating on his current wife? What does that have to do with her going to try to get help, going to the masjid, and they're telling her to have sabr? Have sabr, sister. Have sabr. So she's supposed to just have sabr while that man is beating on her? If she doesn't have anywhere to go, and that's not even a housing or establishment for sisters that are going through abusive relationship. There's nothing for Muslims at all. So where do we go from here? May Allah rectify our affairs.
So the sister in this video, she spoke about our sisters in our community who deal with or go through domestic violence, and she is told either through the Muslim community or the masjid or the imam or the imams or leader in the community to have patience. Well, I definitely agree that the first thing is when you have any type of hardship, patience is very important. All right, patience is very important with these issues. So the doesn't matter if it's domestic violence, that bad news about health, and so on and so forth. But related to the dealings or dealing with domestic violence or spouse that is beating one's wife or striking one's wife, what are some of the community responsibility should it be? First, in Islam, that the Imam or the men inside the Muslim community need to be men, which means they need to handle their affairs related to this brother who is beating his spouse and his wife's complaint, mean that they need to sit the brother down and need to talk to the brother about what Islam say about physically abusing women. And the sister mentioned, she said some people had said, well, that's something they should have found out in the sit down. Well, it's very hard when you have a sit down to know about people's personal relationships or past relationships. No one's going to come to the sit down and say, yeah, I beat my women. Or a sister's not going to come to the sit down and say, yeah, I verbally abused my spouse in the past. No one's going to come to the sit down and say that. Just like you're not going to go to the job interview and tell in the job interview, yeah, that my last job I was fired for being late all the time. When you have a sit down, you tell yourself the best of yourself. So the person needs to have some type of investigation about who they're marrying. And brothers and sisters who know people in the community that are getting married, and the other person beats their wife or was known for beating their wife, you need to let the people know this, that person know this, because there's a manner in the religion. And there's a hadith where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when somebody asks about one of his companions about marriage, the Prophet was very truthful. In one hadith, he said that one of the companions, he said that he was heavy-handed, meaning either he travels a lot or he hits his spouse, right? So the Prophet ﷺ dealt with these type of things in the community. There's another hadith or akhbar on Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu wa huwa kana al-Khalifa. There's a story of Ali radiyallahu anhu when he was the Khalifa, where he seen a man beating his wife. And Ali radiyallahu anhu had told this person to fear Allah, and he showed him his sword. He showed the person, revealed himself, because the person didn't know who he was. And he said that he revealed his sword, and by him revealing the sword, the person knew this was the sword of Ali, because it said Ali has two-edged sword, right? I don't know how authentic is this particular thought on Ali radiallahu anhu. So we understand that in Islam, when we see something, we have to deal with it. And Imams have a responsibility, a mas'uliyah in his community. And there is a amana, a trust. So when I hear sisters like this who complain about being abused or physically abused inside the community, and all she hears is have patience while the person beats her, and then the sister's going to have no choice but get the authorities involved. And that might be a reality if you don't have a framework to deal with domestic violence inside the Muslim community. Another thing I have to explain to sisters inside the Muslim community is that the Imam is also limited. The Imam inside the masjid have limitations. And I know this from being an Imam before. The Imam in the masjid, he has limitation, which means that he's not the law. He is not the law, which means that in the US, the law is police in the court system. So when a judge make a decision or get an order of protection or gives a person an order of protection, the government has the law behind him, meaning that if the person breaks that order of protection, the police will arrest him. He has some authority and power behind his rulings or what he orders or rules that he gives. The Imam in the masjid don't have that. So only thing the Imam could do inside the masjid, because he doesn't have any physical authority, only thing he's able to do is give advice, religious advice, reminders, and then the men inside the Muslim community could assist him in this. And this is where some of the things need to be dealt with, because also there's some people who have some cultural understandings. There's some cultures that I have witnessed that If the women come to the masjid and complain to the imam about the husband, and the husband find out, that could lead that woman to divorce, or that could lead the woman to getting physically hurt or abused. There are some cultures that it's like that. Right? There's some cultures like that. I have witnessed this with my own eyes. So some of the things that sisters needs to do about domestic violence or brothers with domestic violence, first, I think they need to have a sit down with that person and explain to him from the Islamic perspective first, how these things are prohibited in Islam. Next, it needs to be explained to this person the type of trauma that the victims of domestic violence go through and the children who witness domestic violence. I say it again. The imam and the people of the community need to sit down with this brother and show him from Quran and Sunnah where this is prohibited, from beating the wife, and she has a legitimate excuse for divorce in Islam. If you blacken her eye, you break her bones, and it's something that is consistent. It's not something that happened once or twice, but it's something that is consistent, and the woman fear for her life and her health, she has a right for divorce. And because we live in a non-Muslim country, which the authority is not a Muslim, we don't live in a Muslim country, the woman do have the right to go to the authorities to get help and protection if she is not getting the help from the Muslim community. And we know when the kuffar gets involved, it's going to be a lot of problems for that brother. But unfortunately, today, in the times we live in, that is usually what happens. The law get involved. The government has to get involved because the imam, he doesn't have any authority with him, meaning he doesn't have police and law enforcement to back him up. Matter of fact, I seen a brother give advice to somebody once about these type of things, and somebody came to the masjid and beat him up. So the imam, he's might be limited. But back to about giving him advice from Kitab and Sunnah, the prohibitions of beating your women, hurting them, smacking, these things are prohibited in Islam. But the next is going through what are some of the trauma the victims of domestic violence go through. I want to open up something on my computer about domestic violence and how domestic violence affect children and women. I should have downloaded this to this upload to this video looking on my computer. So first thing with domestic violence, it causes the woman to have PTSD. And a lot of women who go through domestic violence have a lot of psychological issues. And one of the psychological issues, somebody who doesn't have any background in mental health will say, well, why you just don't leave? Right? Why you just don't leave? And women and men including that are victims of domestic violence, sometimes it's very hard for them to leave. Right? There is a conjunctive issue going on there. And this is why it's very important that anybody who's an imam, you must study some things about psychotherapy or psychology and psychotherapy so you can have a good background of what type of things happen to a people and why people do things from a conjunctive perspective, right? So they're defined domestic violence as being partners violence, wife beating, spouse abuse, and women abuse. A woman abuse are all terms to describe the acts of violence committed against women violent actions that is committed against a non-intimate will be considered severe crimes. Domestic violence or intimate partner violence, this is coming from a non-Muslim, meaning I'll give a little definition later on that part, is about power, control, and dominance. It is a pattern of behavior used by one of the person to control the thoughts, beliefs, and conduct of their partner, or to punish her for refusing to be controlled, right? So once the abuse and violence behavior have breached the loving bond of a relationship, it will likely increase, intensify over time, often resulting in frequent or severe injuries, right? Child abuse, stalking, murder, or suicide, right? So abuse, violent behavior is a matter of personal will or self-control, and is a means to elevate the abused partner's sense of power, personal power over that partner, right? That intimate partner, their spouse, without regarding for the consequences. At the core of this control is the abused partner's goal to be the decision maker, the one who knows best, the one who has the power. The abused partner is left with limited freedom to make decisions about her life, right? So this is coming from a non-Muslim, and I'm gonna break some things down a little bit to be a little bit concrete with Islam, right? So various of combinations of abuse behavior and vast unique of each individual relationship in terms of each personal history. These behaviors may range from the use of threats, sexual humiliation, force, injuries to children, their property, their money, taking away things from them, taking away their personal property, for example, right? So the primary types of domestic violence, right? And this is what I want to go through because I have to make a little explanation because some of these things, concepts, some people talk about domestic violence or mental health. Sometimes individuals who are Muslim who talk about these things leave out Islam, and sometimes there's some concepts where it's a misunderstanding. For example, when it was saying here, controlling where the person comes and goes, right? I lost my screen for a second. A person, when a person come and go, in Islam, the man has say so over when the woman goes and come. The man in Islam have that say so. According to the kuffar and psychology, they would say, well, if you tell the woman she can't go here and can't go there, oh, that's abuse. In Islam, that is not abuse. That is the husband's haq in Islam. So even though I'm reading through this, right, it's from non-Muslim about domestic violence, I'm going to go and take out some of the filter, some of the things, because some of these things don't coincide with Islam. The Muslim do not have control. The husband does not have control over the woman's wealth, right? The husband cannot make the woman pay bills, right? But the husband do have say so if the wife is spending her money in the fashion where she's becoming broke or wasteful things. He could tell her, hey, you need to put a stop to that. Do not buy that. You're wasting your money, right? Some women have this issue. They buy everything they see, right? For example, they said here sex. In Islam, you can't tell the husband no for sex, and vice versa. You can't tell the wife can't tell the husband no for sex, and the husband can't tell the wife no for sex. Matter of fact, if you as a Muslim man don't give your wife sex, which a lot of Muslims have this issue, I'm black, and black Americans, we don't have this type of issue, right? But I have met other cultures where the husband don't sleep with the wife, never, no sex, 6 months, year. This is abuse in Islam. In Islam, this is abuse, right? So we're not gonna. I don't want to get in deep details from this. I just want to really talk about what is considered to be abuse, right? So verbal and emotional abuse. So verbal and emotional abuse are consistent in almost every abusive relationship, and can increase. It can include. It can include name calling, threats, harassment, taking people's possession of people, excessive possessiveness, right? Isolating, right? Isolating survivors from friends and families. You know, in Islam, a man has the haq to say if the wife shouldn't be with certain women. The men in Islam have that right. If the person she wants to hang with first is not from the mahram, it's not permissible in Islam. If it's a family member that have bad influence over them, or into the haram, the husband have a right to tell the wife, don't bring this person in my house, don't go to this person. But it was about the mother or the father, the woman's mother, the woman's father, the family member, keeping her away from the family member. This is not permissible in Islam. So the woman, she can never see her father no more, or never see her mother no more, for example, unless they have a certain issue with that person. I mean, that person has something, a major issue, where you being that person's present, you're gonna either lose your life or lose your religion or your deen, something like that, right? Um, so the verbal abuse, right? Stupid, dumb, like this, screaming, yelling, you know, um, uh, saying things to her like she's stupid, you're dumb, what's wrong, what's going on, you're ugly, you'll never amount to anything. This is considered to be verbal abuse. And sometimes women do this to men, and men do this to women. And that's why I narrated in the beginning when I was talking, I was saying definition is not restricted to men abusing women, it's also women abusing men. All right. So physical abuse, which means physical attack or aggressive behavior, can range from bruising to murder, right? Often begins with the act that are excessive and trivial, meaning the person is hitting that person over something trivial and small, right? Restraining, pushing, slapping, or pinching, right? Men do this to women, and women do this to men also, right? That escalate into more frequent or serious attacks, punching, kicking, biting, tripping, throwing, and further escalate to life-threatening behaviors like choking the person, breaking bones, or using weapons against the person like knives, guns, things like this, belts, resulting in fatal injury to the woman or her family, right? Here they talk about sexual abuse. I'm not going to get too much in details with sexual abuse, because what the non-Muslim consider to be sexual abuse in Islam, we don't consider. I mean, sexual abuse is not really sexual abuse in Islam, unless, for example, the person is cheating, and she knows, the woman knows that he's cheating, or she, gives her a STD and these type of things. That could fall under this category, right? Things like that. Emotional, economic abuse, right? And this could come in line with Islam also, right? So, economic abuse, in order to maintain control, a abusive partner may leverage economic factors to coerce a woman into believing she is dependent. But economic abuse is a pattern of behavior or actions that prevent a woman from accessing financial resources. Yes. Yes, it's prohibited, right? In Islam, right? Taking away the woman's finances or her money. That's hers. She controls that. Meaning, maintaining control over her earnings, right? Achieving self-sufficient on her behalf, taking up, meaning benefiting from her money, right? And some examples include withholding money, meaning don't taking care of the woman, not giving her money for maintenance or maintaining the house, or don't buy her things, or don't buy food, or don't pay the rent, or don't pay the bills, or take her money to do these things, or force her to do these things, right? Force her to work and things like that. Interfering with education or employment. Well, in Islam, the husband has a right about the woman's workplace and employment. If the woman is going to intermingle working with men, the man in Islam have the right to tell the woman that's not permissible. You cannot work there. The husband has the right to tell the woman this. I don't want you to work there. There's intermingling going on there, or it's bad for her health or bad for her deen. The man has the right in Islam to tell the woman this, right? But for example, a nurse, right, or a woman, or children's daycare, school teacher, he might tell her, don't go there. But in Islam, that's something people need to have a sit down about before they even get married. I think that's something that people need to sit down. So after they get married, they won't be arguing about these things. But this is coming from a kuffar perspective, right? So basically taking her money, using it for his benefit, and not what? Giving her money to maintain her. Now, I want to talk about the vulnerable factors to domestic violence. This section is designed to talk about potential factors that may make a woman more vulnerable to domestic violence, or things that could increase the level of how serious domestic violence could cause her death, or severe harm or damage. For example, meaning that if these things happened to her before, some things happened to her before, meaning sometimes women or people who fall into these things before, sometimes there are people who are easy targets to be the victims of domestic violence, meaning that they might be attractive to people who are violent. Article is not going to say that, but from my personal history of being an imam, I have met Muslimat, Muslim sisters, Muslimat, Muslim sisters who are attractive to abusive men who beat women. And they like it, and they stay with them, and they break the arm, they put them in the hospital, and they always, when they get out that relationship, they go to somebody else who's also abusive, right? So we're going to say, so this right here portion of the article, we're going to talk about why some women are victims to this, right? Abuse in childhood. Experiencing or witnessing abuse in childhood without support, meaning psychological support, intervention, right? Intervention, may lead a woman more vulnerable. I'll say it again. So they said abuse in childhood. That's for you brothers who are looking to get married. When you have sit downs, you need to be asking sisters, were you abused as a child? Sisters, when you in a sit down, you need to ask the brothers, were you abused in childhood? Because all these things affect a person's psyche. Being abused in childhood, or even watching people being abused, even the child being the witness of domestic violence. I might talk about that later on at the end of this video, make a part 2 where I talk about children who witness domestic violence. How does it make them, right? Because PTSD could affect somebody's witnessing domestic violence, like a child, they can't do nothing. He also could suffer from PTSD, right? Watching and hearing his parents scream and yell all day in the house. Hearing his mother scream, yell all day in the house. Seeing his parents argue, screaming, yelling, and fighting all day in the house. All this also affect the child's mental health. Him or she, the child, he or she not having a healthy environment will affect their mental health. So abuse in childhood, for example, experience or witnessing abuse in childhood without support, psychological intervention may leave a woman more vulnerable to experience domestic violence when she's older. Highlight that. Say it again. Experiencing or witnessing abuse in childhood without support, psychological intervention may leave a woman more vulnerable to experience domestic violence when she's older. Meaning that once she gets older and she experiences domestic violence, meaning that she's a witness to it. Most likely when she's an adult, she will get with the partner who's also like that, abusive. See, in the African American Muslim community, the Salafi community, where I came from, nobody want to talk about mental health. And all these things is going on in our community. All this mental, psychological issues are going on in the community. The Muslim, the Imam, is the last one to want to talk about or deal with it or learn about it. Every Imam, somebody who wants to get involved in dawah, needs to learn about mental health. At least mental health awareness. So you can get a little surface understanding of mental health issues, where it derived from, right? So abuse in childhood, experiencing or witness abuse in childhood without support, psychological intervention may leave a woman more vulnerable to experience domestic violence when she's older. Girls who are sexually or otherwise physically abused are 6 times more likely to experience abuse as an adult. All right? And that's actually coming from research, right? It's from research from Intimate Partner Violence and Lifetime Trauma 2011. Fragile support network goes back to what I said in the beginning. If the Imam doesn't give the sister support who's going through domestic violence and the community don't give her support, don't intervene, don't stop. Fragile support network. Having a fragile support network can make a woman more vulnerable to becoming isolated and more easily controlled by a partner, who is victimizing her, who's abusing her, whether it's physical or physical or mentally, verbally and mentally, and physically, right? Verbal, mentally, physically. These three: verbal, mentally, and physically. Later on, talk about how mentally abusing the woman or the husband, right? We know we have people where they love this topic, narcissistic behavior, right? One of these borderline personality disorder, people so narcissistic, right? These things. We talk about that maybe another time. But fragile support networking. Having a fragile support network can make a woman what? More vulnerable to becoming isolated and more easily controlled by the partner. For instance, growing up in the foster care may lead to the lack of a support network in adulthood, creating greater risk for isolation. Devil advocate now. I'm being the devil advocate now. What's the devil advocate? What I'm talking about? Devil advocate. What I'm talking about? And I'm not eating with my left hand, so please don't leave no comments, brother. Why you eating with your left hand? Is my right. When you see the video, everything's the opposite. So, devil advocate. How you think some men find these type of women? Want some type of women who have been abused, who have no support network, because they can take advantage of them. That's being the devil advocate right now. Right? I'm not saying in all cases, but this is also reality. Sometimes men know how to prey on women. Right? They use this to prey on women and to find victims. So what? We mentioned abuse in childhood, which means the woman experiencing or witnessing, seeing domestic violence, experience it herself as a child, or witnessing it, meaning it's happening to her mother, her grandmother, or her aunt, most likely she has the potential factors that may make her, the woman, more vulnerable to domestic violence. Experience or witness abuse in childhood without support. Psychological intervention may lead the woman more vulnerable to experience domestic violence when she's older. A plus. I did a video yesterday where I talked about SP, Salafi pubs. I'm a little dehydrated. Give me a second. Salafi pubs. And they satellite masjids in America, which includes Germantown Masjid. All right. And Umar Quinn's Masjid in Baltimore. And the other satellite communities I have across US, I mentioned there was a child that was molested inside one of their satellite masjids in Baltimore, Maryland, where they wrote a letter, the masjid, exposing the person, saying they called police on this brother, or a brother in the masjid who's a long time follower of Salafi pubs and promoter of theirs since early 2000, touched the boy on 2 occasions in the masjid. And they wrote a letter and said they called the police on this brother because they're going to take these type of steps to protect their kids. And I mention it because Germantown Masjid had an incident worse than that, and they allowed the brother to get away because he was one of their imams, callers to their propaganda, who was raping and molesting his stepdaughter, allegedly, for 2 years while he was studying in Medina and she was there with her mother. And this was a foul-mouthed criminal anyway. I don't know why they made him an imam or a leader to teach, because they're criminals themselves, and they allow him to leave. I said in previous video yesterday, no one's talking about those children who were touched, what they are going through psychologically, and most likely those masjids are not giving them any support, psychological support, whether Islamic psychology, because that particular community are criminals. That particular community, they're criminals, because they go around causing a lot of division in the Muslim community, especially within the Salafi community. They cause division, and I find that their community has the most dysfunction. When I made that video yesterday, some brother from Philly that I know who works in psychotherapy, who does psychotherapy in Philadelphia, and says, yes, brother, you're right. A lot of my clients who come in are from the Germantown Masjid community, Salafi community, and their children here leave Islam. Like I said, they don't talk about how the cult affect women and children. He said, yes, they come in. They're lesbian, on drugs, this, that, abandoned the deen, apostate, all of that. No one talks about intervention with any of these things that happen. So back to the article that I'm reading. So the woman doesn't have any support network, and that also includes that video I was talking about, not giving these women and children a support network. And then people who are doing the crime to them, there are actually the imams and leaders. And that's the incident in Baltimore with Musa Windu, longtime promoter and supporter of SP, and Abdul Waleed Nelson, who was one of their imams and leaders in Germantown. Right? Continuing. Women with disabilities and mental illness. Women with disabilities or mental illness. So women with disabilities or mental illness also are very vulnerable for domestic violence. And I have seen this a lot. Women will have a disability or suffer from mental illness may be particularly vulnerable because they may depend on a partner in ways that other women do not. This can create a special opportunity for manipulation by their abuser. An abuser may withhold medication or refuse to take the survivor to her necessary appointments. I witnessed this myself before in Egypt. A sister who was in a wheelchair from South America married this Egyptian brother, and he was beating the heck out of her, and he was using her disability to abuse her. Wouldn't let her go for treatment, beating her and smacking her because she was not able to defend herself. For women who struggle with mental illness, there's an opportunity for abuse partners to convince law enforcement, the criminal justice, and sometimes even the survivor themselves that the abuse is not real, it's just made up, or one symptom within the mental illness. Additionally, when abusers manipulate the situation and present their partner as being crazy, it could lead to their partner committing to a mental institution against their will. I would say, Allahu Alam, because I know some sisters who have mental health illness who've been diagnosed with mental health illness, and they choose these type of men. I have met sisters who have mental health issues. They don't choose them, but they end up with men like this. So I agree with this art. I agree with this part for a portion. Yes. Culturally now that's a whole big thing. I might have to stop there as a part 2 video. Cultural or religious beliefs. I mean, with the Muslims, I have met many different cultural beliefs as being Muslim, and I've seen crazy scenarios and culture related to domestic violence. And in some culture, man, it appears to be the norm in some cultures, right? So in some cultures and religion, talking about any relationship or marital problems may be frowned upon, and abuse might be minimalized or thoughts of as something women just deal with. Yes, I have seen this. Yemeni culture, actually. Some Yemeni culture, I have seen this with some Yemeni sisters before. Yemeni, who else? And Bangladeshi women, I have seen them complain. But the abuse is not like beatings, it's like no sex or taking away money from them, or not allowing them to see their family members like their mother or their father. You know, sometimes the cultural things is very difficulty to explain, because I have seen cases when there's some type of abuse going on. It's not physically, but it's like mentally, and then the women complaining, and the husband's like, yo, her family makes me pay them money every month, and I'm poor and I can't pay it. I have to take care of her and take care of their family back in their country. It's like, I'm poor. So the cultural things, you know, that leads for the Muslim who is a imam or somebody involved in dawah to really not just study Islam in and out, but to understand the different peoples in their community cultures, because that does happen. I've seen that before. The woman's complaining about financial abuse. The husband's not giving her money, and when he comes and I talk to them, I talk to them, he showed me all the money. He's poor, man. This guy has so many kids. He has a minimum wage job, 2 minimum wage job. He showed me his rent. She showed me a list of how much money he has to send her family. And this is not like the family's right. It is not the family. So some cultural stuff. And he's going financially crazy because he doesn't have all this money. So, the cultural stuff, it does exist, but that leads or that needs for a Muslim who's in dawah to really understand people's culture so they could give them some Islamic advice, because some cultures do go against Islam. Some cultural practice and beliefs and practice do go against Islam. Right? Rest I'm gonna leave because it's talking about some stuff that is not permissible and it's haram in this article, and it's coming from the kuffar. Now, domestic violence on children. The effects of domestic violence on children. I think this is the most important thing related to domestic violence and children. When children and people witness domestic violence, as I mentioned, until when I mentioned about this particular video, where I read in this article about the abuser, if she had witnessed in childhood or experienced this stuff in childhood, it will affect her as she's an adult, right? So we understand with domestic violence, it affects children. So some of the effects of children, you got to remember that children are developing physically and mentally. Children are developing, right? So once the child witnesses these behaviors that's not normal, the child will feel very strange. And then when a child witnesses domestic violence from his parents, whether it's physical or verbal or both, the child really has no one to talk about. So children who witness domestic violence also start experiencing low self-esteem, might experience what we call PTSD, because PTSD also affect people who are dealing with trauma, but those who are dealing with people who deals with trauma. And PTSD also affect people who witness trauma, right? So the child is witnessing these things, and then the child start developing low self-esteem, might start wetting the bed, for example, might start not paying attention in school, for example. And all these things affect him in his life, whether even his education, how he behaves in school, and what he or she does in school. It affects the child's behavior. And just like the article said, when for example, women who witness domestic violence, witness or experience it in their youth, are most likely in their adulthood to get in these type of domestic violent relationships. That also goes with people who beat their spouse, right? It also goes with people who beat their spouse. The person who beat their spouse, woman or man, verbal or physically, might witness their parent doing this to the other parent in the household growing up. Might witness his parents, or other one of his parents' partners, doing this growing up. We have to be real. We're not from no Islamic society in America, so some of us, our parents, we've seen the works, right? For some of us, right? Especially for us who converted to Islam. So, for example, with domestic violence, how it would affect children, it affect children mentally and physically also. Might wet the bed, might not do good in school, have low self-esteem, hard for them to express themselves. And then they don't have nobody to talk to this about in school or at home or outside. And somebody might ask them, well, how do you feel when your parents are fighting? They might say that they don't like it because they're fearing for the mother, for example. Then that child grows up with low self-esteem. And just like the article said, women who are victim of domestic violence most likely witness it in their childhood. So yes, children are affected by domestic violence. That's why you shouldn't be arguing with your spouse in front of your children. You shouldn't be arguing and fighting in front of your children, even if you're arguing and fighting over the kids. I learned this later on in life, right? You shouldn't even be arguing and fighting in front of the kids, even if it's about them. Because the child is going to grow up with a lot of mental health issues when they grow up. And even some of the men who beat women, some of them might grow up and their father was like this with their mother. Women who verbally abuse their husband. See, no one wants to talk about this part right now. Women who scream and shout and verbally abuse their husband might have learned that from her mother. Her mother might have been just like that with her father. Also, the one of the children or the parents who's abusing the victim of domestic violence, or the parent that's doing the abuse, might also been abused as a child. That's why it's important to ask all these things even before you get married. Sometimes people don't think that these things are not important, or this simple answer. You don't even have to ask them, was you abused? Like, you could ask them something simple. That your parents fight a lot growing up. The person might say, yeah, that's the sign for you. Your parents fight a lot growing up. The person said, yeah, that's the sign for you. You're going to ask them, was you abused as a child? The person might say no. But just ask them, do your parents fight a lot and argue a lot? They're not thinking like the psychologist would think or a therapist would think. They might say, yeah, man, my parents used to always argue and fight all the time. That's a sign for you. It doesn't mean that she or like that, but it could give you a sign. You know, somebody say this. A woman might say to you, "I was abused by one of my parents growing up, physically abused or sexual abuse." That should be a sign for you. And I mean that person is going to be abusive, but that person might have some mental health issues going on there. Might have some psychological issues going on there. Right? I give you some things that might be real. I have heard of this before. Some type of characteristics of the person who's the abuser, for example. Um, Emotional, verbally, physically, for example. Um, I've seen this before. Abuse of a pregnant partner. I have seen this before many times, not once, many times. Sometimes there's more violence when the partner is pregnant or soon after she gives birth. This is something that is real. I have seen this before. Matter of fact, I know of a sister who was had a miscarriage because the husband was beating her while she was pregnant. I have witnessed these things and seen these things happen before the people, right? Sometimes there's more violence when the partner is pregnant or soon after she gives birth. A recurring theme, if you would have my baby or have one more baby, that things would be better, right? That's what they're saying here. Man, the scenarios I see will be a little bit different. I see some people say if they have one more child or they have a child and the woman gets pregnant and maybe the husband say, oh, I don't want no more kids. I see this with some brothers. I've seen this before. I don't want no more kids. I seen a scenario where it was um The brother wanted the sister to work because he wanted to take her money, her paycheck to pay the bills, right? So when the sister got pregnant, they were saying, or he was saying, when she's pregnant, why get pregnant? He's beating her while she's pregnant because she don't want to go to work because she's pregnant now and have the morning sickness. Seen that. I remember a scenario where a sister was pregnant and the husband was beating her and abusing her. You know, when they say here abuse of a partner, sometimes there's more violence when the partner is pregnant or soon after she gives birth. Like a recurring theme, if you have my baby or have one more baby, then things will be better. Yet abuse during pregnancy have also been called the poor man's abortion. I've seen that also, where he doesn't want the woman to have the kid and he beats her and punches her until she has a miscarriage, right? Drug abuse, that definitely happens, right? Um, Sometimes the person or the partner is abusive, use drugs. That does happen in many cases, but in most of my experience with the Muslims who come to the masjid and practice, it doesn't happen a lot. Depends on what nationality, but sometimes there is there. Sometimes, all right. So that's one incident. Um, Next, children who suffer from some of these, who witness these things, oftentimes some abusers threaten the other spouse, threatens to hurt their children. This happens also. The abusive persons threaten to hurt the individual child and also hurt the child. I know a couple of incidents of this. For example, the parent is fighting and it's the child's mother and he defends her, and then the man hits him, strikes him, or use a weapon against him. These things happen, unfortunately, in domestic violence. So the child who witnessed domestic violence at some cases become victims themselves. I mean, they become broken limbs, broken body, broken limbs, bruises, and things like that. Sometimes with the domestic violence with the child who witnessed it, might be suffering, might cause the child to suffer from other behavior problems. That's what I didn't get into before, right? So sometimes the child themselves who witnessing domestic violence causes them to have misbehavior because he doesn't know how to express himself. He doesn't know his feelings that's going on in his body and things. And the child, he or herself are also developing. So as the child witnesses these events, what's going on, he doesn't know how to, he or she don't know how to express themselves. So that child might start misbehaving also, or even mimicking the abuse that it might mimic the abuser. All right. You might also mimic the abuser. Going to school, he might be the bully in school, for example, right? I'm just going through some things I learned from before. He might be the abuser, the bully in school. Sometimes you need to sit down and think. So there is a the effects of domestic violence on women and children, you know, and unfortunately, because women who suffer from domestic violence also, she develops low self-esteem. Sometimes she will, when she leaves from the abuser, which is hard also, right? There's a cognitive reason behind this because the abuser make her feel like that she needs that person. Sometimes when they eventually leave, some of them they go and get with somebody else who's also an abuser. So there's a lot of psychological things going on there. And it's also important, especially for brothers and sisters, even when they're looking to get married, to ask a person, were you ever in an abusive relationship? You don't have to ask them for the details of what happened, but these would be like trigger words for you when they say, "Yeah, I was in a domestic relationship before." That should be like some trigger words for you. When you hear that, light bulbs should be popping up to do a little bit more investigation. Now, I will end on that particular note. Um, I didn't want to make this video too long, but I really need to talk about domestic violence in the community, man. This is something, mental health, um, uh, BPD, you know, borderline personality disorders, domestic violence, depression, PTSD. We need to start having little conversations about that because I find since the pandemic and I was the downtime for the pandemic, I took some little courses here and there. Inshallah, I'm trying to further something for next month. The next school year is about to come up for Islamic psychology, but we really need it in our community, man, because we could talk about Tawheed, Aqidah, Salafiyah all day, and we could talk about all these things all day, but if we don't have real solutions that's coming from Kitab and Sunnah, and a lot of the inner city Black Muslim community, man, there's a lot of stuff going on. Suicide, young people committing suicide, young Muslims, Black males, females committing suicide in the inner city. Even the pandemic of itself, it's another whole talk. The COVID-19 and the pandemic, that's another talk psychologically, how that affect peoples. A lot of things we see going on right now in the news, a lot of violence in places are happening. Like here, I'm in New York, somebody getting shot every day, people are shooting. All that has to do with mental health and the pandemic and people being locked down. You know, not having money, not having access to money. And then one thing in the African American Muslim community, when it comes to some of the social problems that are happening within the community that the Imams don't want to talk about, unfortunately, even in the Salafi community, they don't want to talk about it. They want to skip these subjects, right? They don't talk about what is the effect of racism and systemic racism and white supremacy on the African American community. Because there is a psychological effect to all these things. What we see Black people going through, somebody who's been in war or war environment, they develop PTSD. African Americans in America, they suffer from PTSD, from systemic racism. That stuff going to affect your relationships with people. It's going to affect your marriage. It's affecting you psychologically. It's affecting you physically. You wonder why Black people have high blood pressure. Don't know when police are going to shoot you because you're Black. You're driving your car and police stop you. You don't know if they're going to shoot you or not. All that stuff causes mental health issues. So a lot of even things in a relationship that we see in the relationships in the African American Muslim community, there are dysfunction. from social behavior problems, from economical issues. All that is related to uh, systemic racism. So there's PTSD from systemic racism in America. No one wants to talk about it. Even they don't want to bring the Islamic solutions for some of these issues or dealing with some of the symptoms of these things. But best believe this stuff is going to impact the Black community. You will find that people in poverty, they suffer from a lot of mental health issues. People from war-torn countries suffer from mental health issues. I remember I met a brother from Philistine. This guy always have like anxiety, man. Every time somebody say something to him, he's like, get very defensive real quick. And I have to tell him, we're not fighting. It's not a fight. I have to remind him. And he told me he grew up in Palestine as a child. So imagine the things that he witnessed in Philistine and Palestine. It caused him to have anxiety, PTSD on top of the anxiety, because you never know. Think about it. He told me when he was a kid, when he first came to America, they had to sleep on the train. And Palestinians, just think about it. I talk about African American issues and PTSD and all this. People don't want to listen to it. But I'll mention some Arabs and show you the signs of the Arabs and Palestinians, then you probably will listen to me, right? But if you look at some of the Palestinians, right? Just imagine anytime the Jew, the Israeli, come to your house and kick you out. Then you have no country, especially in the Arab world, coming to your aid. And the Muslims outnumber the Jews. And imagine you leave Palestine, you have to go to other Arab countries, Muslim countries, and you're a refugee there. So you're not fully a citizen. So any minute, was you in the refugee camp, any minute, that temporarily home, you could lose it. Then you go to this country and you're a refugee. That will cause people to have mental health issues. People never ask why homeless people got mental health issues. Being homeless give you mental health issues. Not having a secure home give you mental health issues. Not having a secure home, not having a home to sleep in, you would start developing mental health, because anything can happen to you at any time. And even if you're on the break of losing your home or not having a place, you would develop mental health issues. Now imagine the Palestinians, right? I mentioned African American Muslims and slavery in America and what it calls. You can't grasp that. But if I tell you how the Arabs, Palestinians got these issues and why I have what type of mental health issues will cause you living in a place like Palestine, where the Jew is bombing your home, killing your mother. It will cause you to have PTSD, anxiety, depression. And his brother I knew was Palestinian, always upset, ready to fight. I had to remind him we're not in a fight. And I thought, anxiety. And he grew up in America since he's a small kid. And he's adult, and he's still affected with the events of what happening in Palestine. And he's adult, and he grew up in America, but he left Palestine when he was small, right? So the environment that you're in, it affects you. Same thing with domestic violence. The environment the environment that's the house is in, if it's fighting, screaming, yelling, shouting, it's going to affect the peace and the mind of the child. That's why sometimes divorce is good. If you're screaming and yelling in the house all the time, divorce is good. Because your child, if he gets to still see one of the parents and they divorce, at least they don't have that chaos fighting every day in the house. Sometimes divorce is good for the child. Sometimes, as long as they have both parents in his life. But if they fighting, screaming, and yelling and shouting, the child going to develop some mental health issues. Might resent you also when you get older. The environment that you make you put your children in, they are the product of the environment. And sometimes people who perpetrate abuse on another person, like a child or another person, sometimes that person gets older, the child gets older, or that person gets to a certain level, they also implement that abuse on the other person. You don't believe me? Go back to Palestine. Look at the Jews. The Jews are doing to the Palestinians. See, if I talk about black people issues, y'all don't hear. But if I talk about non-black peoples, y'all will listen. Look at the Jews. Hitler oppressed the Jews and killed them off. Right? Call it the Holocaust. And the Jews said, never again. So in Israel, the Jews are doing the same thing. The Israelis are doing the same things that Hitler did to them. They're doing it to the Palestinian people. So sometimes the victims eventually become the abuser also. Just like the child witness abuse in the house might grow up and commit those acts on their spouse. But that's another time for another day. I spoke long enough, over an hour. If you like this channel, if you want to see more or more topics about this topic, you could definitely donate. You could click like and share, and you could donate to this channel. If you look in the description of this video, you will find the description to donate. On Cash App is Cash App is $ Islam's Finest, or you could hit me up at in PayPal, and you can look in the description and you can find that Black American Muslim Opinion. We have a GoFund page. We are trying to move to the next level with Black American Muslim Opinion, because I want to take all these things off of social media. I want to get off of social media. I just only using it to get people's attention. But I have a plan for Black American Muslim Opinion. You can see our outline of our plans and goals in the description of the video. And if you'd like to donate and you like to give, you please hit the GoFund page, and you get a description, and you can donate there on our GoFund page. If you like to be interviewed or want to talk, you can definitely contact me from blackamericanmuslimopinions.com. Our website is also in the description of the video, or you can leave a comment in this video wherever you're seeing it at, and I will try to get back to the comments. But if you're on YouTube, most likely I won't get any notifications for comments on YouTube. But if you go to our website, you will definitely be able to put in ask a request there. So please go to our GoFund page and look at our goals for Black American Muslim Opinions. I am planning to write a small book on Black social issues in America with Islamic solutions. That is also part of our goals. Really in the middle of finishing up some other books, but I really want to start working on an action plan for Black Americans, some of our social issues with an Islamic perspective. What I was reading from today was this from a small course on domestic violence. And I really wanted to talk about the effects of domestic violence on women and children, especially children. So if anything, please like and share. Thank you.